Shut up!
At a grocery store parking lot, a father repeatedly beat his toddler son and screamed at him. A bystander recorded the video of this incident, which showed the man's aggressive educational approach to the fullest. 44-year-old James Collins
Shut up! Shut up!
at a grocery store parking lot, a father repeatedly beat his toddler son and screamed at him. A bystander recorded the video of this incident, which showed the man's aggressive educational approach to the fullest. 44 4-year-old James Collins was in the back seat of his truck, shouting at the child and constantly telling him to. During this period, a woman attempted to intervene, and then Collins began to shout at her, telling her to mind her own business. The child's crying drew a crowd of onlookers. Approach to the fullest. 44-year-old James Collins was in the back seat of his truck, shouting at the child and constantly telling him to. During this period, a woman attempted to intervene, and then Collins began to shout at her, telling her
Shut up! Shut up!
at a grocery store
The following stories are definitely not paranormal, but in my opinion, scarier. My friend told me about something that happened to her when she was younger, about 8 or 9. She was walking home from school and got her key out to let herself into the house. Her single mom worked and came home later on the weekdays. As she reached up to put the key in the door, her mom opened it in a nightgown, having left home sick. Instead of greeting her, she looked straight past my friend and immediately said, "Who are you?" My friend turned around and a man in a long coat hurried back down the path and down the street. Being sick that day potentially saved her daughter from something potentially horrible happening to her. People are scary. Was talking to someone who was the first on scene to the Virginia Tech massacre. He told me that although the sight of dead bodies was disturbing, what really stayed with him was the sound of the cell phones ringing from people trying to contact them. That is so fucked up. When I was 13, my dad was taken to the hospital. My mother joined him, leaving me in the house alone, sleeping. When they came back, they noticed handprints all on the downstairs window and snow trodden in the porch. They searched the house and nobody was there. The next day, we found out our next door neighbor was murdered. I know it's not that scary, but when I think about how close I came to possibly being murdered, or worse, first, it sends chills down my spine.
Just think about it. It's around 1 in the morning. You just came from having fun, hanging out, clubbing with your friends, only for you to have to face yourself. Scary story time. Hey y'all, sorry it's been so long. My life has literally been flipped upside down, but I love and appreciate you guys for the patience. So there's this girl, let's call her Marissa. She got off of work around like 5 p.m. and her best friend hits her up like, hey girl, let's go outside. It's Friday, let's go out. She's like, bet, we're outside. So they go out, they have fun, they have a great time. As they're leaving, she meets this guy and he's charming, he's handsome, he's perfect. Exchange numbers, and before she leaves, he gives her a kiss on the cheek. She's blushing and has butterflies going home. So her friend drops her off at home. She's drunk. She goes inside and she starts to notice that the cheek where he kissed her seems a little itchy. And so she's thinking, oh my God, these men in their beards, blah, 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 whatever. So she decides she's going to get in the shower before she goes to bed. And so she gets her pajamas, goes to the bathroom, only to notice that there is a rash on her cheek. This sobers her up really quick. Because the area that she was in, that she lived, because this was in her home country, they are very deep and very heavily into voodoo. And so now she's like, oh no, did I just get got? And so she just decides, you know what, maybe I'm just drunk and overthinking it. Let me get in the shower, put some cream on it, and it'll be better in the morning. And she does just that. She gets in the shower, she takes her shower, she puts some cream on it, and she goes to bed. But little does she know, she ain't going to sleep no time soon. So she's in bed, and as she's about to fall asleep,
about you, and it's no one else like you is what they're getting. Positive vibes only.
Like,
Shout out to King Saul's boss in the building.
She's like, oh, I'm probably just drunk. And she tries to go back to sleep again. Only this time, her name is being called, but it was her full name. The first time was just her first name. This time, it's her full government. And at this point, she shook. She sat up, and she waited to see if she was going to hear it again. And she heard it again. Only this time it screamed, and she realized that it was coming from out of her window. And so she walks to her window only to see herself standing outside calling her name.
Let's talk about scary sleep paralysis. If you're new here, hi. I usually talk about pretty scary stuff, and I just heard the scariest story I have ever heard about sleep paralysis. And it was from one of my boyfriend's friends. Well, let's get into it. If you don't know what sleep paralysis is, it's essentially when your body is fully asleep but your mind is awake. What I mean by that is your mind is fully functioning, but you are physically unable to move. A lot of people say that they have negative experiences with sleep paralysis because they are thinking of scary things happening, so scary things do happen. And just for some baseline context, this person was like 7 or 8 years old on a road trip that took about 2 days with himself, his sister, his mom, and his dad. They're taking this pretty large vehicle from what I can imagine my brain, because they were able to put down all the seats in the back to lay out like this huge bed for him and his sister to sleep on while they're on this road trip. So him and his sister are sleeping. His parents pull into a gas station. They wake him up and are like, hey, when we knock on the window, let us back in because we're going to leave the keys in the car. He says, okay, closes his eyes, because he knows he'll wake up when his parents knock on the window. Not 5 minutes later, he hears the driver's side door open and somebody climb in. He's immediately thinking like, oh, one of my parents is back. They didn't take the keys. They changed their mind because they knew that we were sleeping, something like that. Until he hears heavy breathing. And if that wasn't scary enough, this heavy breathing was also accompanied by scratching. And this family had leather seats in their car, so it was pretty prominent. And as he starts to open his eyes, he is convinced that it is his sister playing a trick on him. And at this point, the breathing is getting heavier and heavier, and the scratching is getting louder and louder and louder. And he goes to turn and look at his sister, and he realizes he cannot move. And at this point in the story, when he's telling me, he says that it seriously sounded like someone was ripping the chair open from how hard they were scratching at it. And he says he starts trying to wake his body up, and he is fighting it hard. And eventually he comes out of it, he turns over, and his sister is sleeping, and there is no one there. Shortly after this, his parents knock on the window like they said they were going to, and he lets them in and lets them know what happened. They essentially said like, oh, it's okay because it wasn't real. I primarily think this is a much scarier story than I'm used to reading about sleep paralysis because he couldn't see what was going on. And I personally have not experienced sleep paralysis, and I think that's because my anxiety doesn't allow me to, so knock on wood, I don't want to experience that. But anyways, that's going to do it for me. Stay tuned for my ghost stories.
There are weird things that happen in the Appalachian Mountains at night. Now, this story comes out of North Carolina. There was this young man named Chris. Now, Chris said he grew up in North Carolina, and he said him and his friends one summer decided they were going to go camping. Well, they found this nice little spot up in the mountains, and he said, it was about like a 3-mile hike. They get to their campsite, and they set up their tents and everything, and the first night, they have a really good time. The next morning, when they wake up, they said they got out of their tents, and they were surprised at these 2 coyotes standing outside of their campsite, and they were just staring at them. And they thought it was really weird because it was daytime. Well, they said eventually the coyotes, just wandered off. Well, that night, they said they were in their tents, they were sleeping, when they heard a woman screaming. And it was like very distinct. And they're all freaking out, like, what do we do? What do we do? And eventually it stopped.
Shout out to Sauce, the boss, of course, man. Who's in the building, man?
They get up.
Shout out to Sauce,
and
the
they're talking
boss,
amongst
of
themselves,
course,
like,
man.
maybe we should check out the woods and see if someone needs help. So they set off into the woods.
Sauce, the boss in the building.
They said there was this real nice tent. There was a cooler and it still had food in it. There was some diapers and some clothes inside the tent. There was, just all this stuff around the campsite. Like whoever was there left in a hurry. Well, Chris said next to the campsite, he sees this tree, and carved into this tree is a heart. And he said there was a woman, a man, and what looked like a young child's name carved into this tree. And he thought, that's like really odd. So they leave the campsite and they go back to their campsite. They go to bed that night and they are awoken to the sound of a child crying. And they're like, where is this coming from? What is making this sound? So they unzip their tent. And when they go outside of the tent, they discover this very young child who's there crying. So they pick up the kid and they comfort him and eventually get him to fall asleep. They put him inside the tent and they zip it up. They then call the sheriff's office and are like, hey, we found this kid wandering around the woods at night. We don't know what to do. So after about an hour or so, the sheriff pulls up and he looks like he's very mad. And he starts yelling at these kids, what are you guys trying to pull? What is your play here? What's going on? And they're like, what are you talking about? We found this kid. And he's like, what kid? They take the sheriff over to the tent. And when they unzip it, they are surprised to find the tent is completely empty. There is no child in there, which is weird because they're watching this tent the whole time. There's no way this kid could have gotten out. So the sheriff's like, I don't know what kind of game you guys are playing, but you need to leave because it's eerie to me that you knew about the woman and the man and their kid that disappeared here. And they're like, what are you talking about? And he's like, well, 10 years ago, there was a woman and a man and their young kid, and they went missing at their campsite. Not a lot of people knew about this, so I have no idea how you guys found out, but it's pretty messed up that you would try and play a prank like this. And they insisted with the sheriff, we're not lying, this really happened. And the sheriff never did believe them. And he said he would never go back into those woods again.
Do you know Mary Bell? Do you know what she did? Mary Bell was an 11-year-old killer. She took the lives of a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old little boy when she was still a child herself, both death by strangulation. 11-year-old Mary Bell even carved the letter M on one of her victims' stomachs using a pair of scissors. Seemingly out of nowhere, out of pure cruelty. Terrible case, horrendous, dark, and honestly scary. I was listening to Candace DeLong on Killer Psyche. She did a deep dive on this case. She's a former FBI agent and a criminal profiler, right? So she has seen a lot. She went into depth about how these murders affected the community, what left people shocked, and how investigators were shocked themselves. And they were investigating and looking into the deaths and realized that all of their signs were pointing to their killer that they were looking for being another child, because they could tell that not much force was used on the victims. They also found some notes as evidence. They were handwritten. One of those notes said, quote, "I murder so that I may come back." By the way that they were written, they were kind of sloppy. Things were misspelled. It looked like a child wrote it, so much so that detectives themselves thought that it must be a kid or a child playing some sort of sick joke. But what really made a light bulb go off in investigators' head was when they were interviewing Mary Bell, this kid, and she mentioned scissors. Remember, we think scissors were what was used to carve the letter M on one of the victims? Well, in her interview with police, Mary Bell brought up scissors. That information had never been released to the public. So investigators then, when they were talking to Mary Bell, who was only 11 years old, they were convinced that she could be the one responsible for these crimes. But it does make you think, what went wrong? What happened in that childhood child's brain to make them commit such horrible acts. When Candace talked about her research in Mary Bell's childhood, in her life experiences, and connecting some of those dots to the crimes, word why was used a lot. Why would someone do something like this? Why would someone want to take someone's life away? And why would a child ever take another child's life? And the points that Candace brought up, I have to tell you about them. I'm basically going to leave the floor open for you guys. We're going to use the comment section as a big group chat because this is really fascinating to me. He talked about how many courts decide if someone is guilty or not if they understand the difference between right and wrong, and or if they understand that their behavior was a crime. He talks about how at 10 or 11 years old, obviously your brain is not fully developed yet, about how death is a difficult concept to understand for anyone, let alone an 11-year-old child, about how children learn what is right and wrong from their parents. Discussing information that Candace has from her experiences in crime cases, trying to get a better understanding of how the justice system deals with sentencing child killers and diving in deep to figure out what justice really looks like. Mary Bell was sentenced for her crimes, but she was released when she was 23 years old. Mary Bell is still alive out there, living her life with a different name. The question that I was left with, and what Candace discussed on her podcast, is, was that really justice? I don't know. So many interesting topics. And again, it's not about, is it right or wrong? Of course it's wrong. What Mary Bell did is wrong. There could never be an excuse for it, but trying to figure out the why is definitely an interesting conversation. Let me know what you guys think about this case specifically, but also about the psychology of child killers, because I need to talk about this with someone and you guys are my people.
When his car was found in the middle of the night, his engine was still running and his headlights were on, and just a few meters away were all of his clothes. It was the 13th of December 2020 in Texas. Jason Landry was a 21-year-old student at Sam Houston State University. He was a really nice, happy young guy. He was always up for a laugh, not taking life too seriously. He was actually really excited because he was heading home to spend the Christmas holidays with his family and his old friends. But certain friends noticed he'd started acting kind of weird recently. He'd been smoking W, and one friend said that he had started chatting more about like aliens and conspiracies and things like that, but the friend didn't really know whether this was kind of in a serious way or whether this was just a high person chatting. On the evening in question, he did get in his car and he started heading back home. Now, this should have taken him roughly 2.5 hours. He'd popped his destination into the Waze app so that he could navigate back home. With him in the car, he had a bag of toiletries he had packed, like things he would need for his stay, including a PlayStation, laptop, and his 2 pet fish. Jason's phone documented the route that he took, and he was kind of in contact with people during his journey. He was making some calls. He was on FaceTime to his ex-girlfriend, and he was sending her several Snapchats. All seemed fine, and he seemed in good spirits. But when he reached Lulling at 11:24 p.m., he suddenly stopped using the Waze app. He then went the total opposite direction to the direction he should have been heading in. At 11:28 p.m., he sent his ex a chilled-looking selfie of him, and nobody would ever hear from him again. In the early hours of the morning, Jason's car was found abandoned with clear signs of a single car crash. The keys were still in the ignition and the lights were still on. And bizarrely, just meters away from the vehicle were a pile of Jason's clothes, even including shoes and underwear. His backpack was also found very close by, with sadly inside his pet fish who had passed away. When Jason's dad heard about the crash, he was horrified and he went over to the scene of the accident, but Jason's car had already just been towed away. No evidence had even been collected from the scene. They just sort of chalked this off as an accident. Jason's dad really was the one who had to push police and kind of be the driving force in this investigation. He was the one that found Jason's phone inside of the towed car. What he found from this phone was so unusual, it really made no sense. Phone records showed that after he sent that Snapchat to his ex, Jason's phone location just stopped. It stopped working. The information just abruptly stopped. And for over an hour, the phone was just not picking up any location data. This was despite the phone still being on and still having signal. Now, police did organize a search operation, but despite their best efforts, despite even like tracker dogs being involved, there was no sign of the missing boy. Then in 2022, 2 years after Jason's disappearance, a man with a striking resemblance to Jason came into the hospital. He had been found unconscious in New York, but just look how similar the two faces look. Sadly, though, despite this giving the family some short-lived hope, this actually wasn't Jason. This was just somebody who just happened to be his doppelganger. To this day, we still have no answers as to what happened to Jason that night.
Oh my god, brr, it's fall. Let's all pretend it's October. Let's pretend it's cold outside, even though it doesn't get cold outside in October here in the valley, because what the fuck? On the upside, we live really close to the island, so get anyone hungry? So this girl says that her family and her family moved into this house in Mexico, and it was one of those houses that shared a wall with the neighbor. So any little sound that they would make, you would hear, and vice versa. Every night, almost like around the same time, they would hear a baby crying, and it became such a frequent thing that every time they would hear the baby cry, they'd be like, oh, there goes the baby crying again. At this point, they hadn't met their neighbors just yet. They didn't, I mean, obviously they knew they had a baby, but they didn't know if they had other kids as well. She was the oldest of her siblings, so it was her, a brother, and a little sister. So one day when she's taking care of her siblings and her parents are working, she noticed that the neighbors were outside and the kids were playing. So she's like, hey, let's go outside and play with them and get to know them since we live right next to them. So she's out there, and they had kids similar to her siblings in age. And when she started talking to the oldest there, she said that she's like, hey, where's your baby? Can we meet her? We do hear her like across the wall. We hear her crying sometimes. And the neighbor looks at her like, no, we don't have a baby. And she's like, what? No, like we hear the baby crying. And her neighbor's like, okay, I'm gonna tell you, but don't freak out. A baby did pass away in your apartment, and I promise you that we do not have a baby, but sometimes we do hear the baby sounds, and it's coming from your apartment, not from ours. So she has no idea what to make of it. She's like, what if they're just joking around or like pranking me? Because again, this is the first time that they meet. And she waited for her mom and dad to come home, and she tells them what the neighbor said. She tells them that they didn't have a baby and that they knew that a baby had passed away in their apartment, so there was never a baby crying on the other side of the wall. Her mom also thought the same. She's like, oh, they're just playing a prank on you. We clearly hear that baby through the wall. So some time passes. They still sometimes hear the baby, and there is a night where it was basically her job as, you know, the eldest daughter to tuck her siblings into bed. And she says that she was in her siblings' bedrooms putting them to bed, reading them a book. Sometimes she would sing to them as well. And that's what she was doing that night with the door closed. And as she's reading them a book, the dad walks into the room like so urgently. And he's like, what's wrong? What's going on? She's looking at him like, what do you mean? Like, what are you talking about? And he's like, I heard somebody crying, like they got hurt. And she's like, no, look at us. They're laying in bed like nothing's wrong. And she says that she could tell by the look in her dad's face where he was like, fuck. This place is haunted, and I heard a kid crying. He thought it was his kids because it was definitely coming from inside the apartment. Time would pass, and they would continue to hear these sounds where the parents were like, oh shit, something's wrong, because they thought that their kids were crying like they had gotten into accidents inside the house or something. It got so bad that the bedrooms for mom and dad were right across from each other. The parents moved their bed right in front of the door and did the same thing to the siblings' bed. They couldn't sleep with the doors closed anymore. That way, if they heard something, they could just look across the hall and see their kids asleep. Like, it got to that point where like they were hearing all these sounds in the room and they just wanted to make sure it wasn't the kids. But obviously, that is not the way that you should be living. So eventually, they did move out of that place because of how bad it was. All those cries of a baby and them thinking it was the neighbor. And indeed, it was never the neighbor. The neighbors did not have a baby. I feel like I'd be freaking out too. Like, imagine like just being woken up, hearing a cry, thinking it's your kid, and you go in there and it's like, there's no one there, but you clearly heard somebody crying. I would have moved out too, but what do you guys think?
This case is so eerily similar to the Amy Bradley cruise ship disappearance, it's uncanny. This woman also vanished on a cruise ship, but her case is solved. It was May 2006 when the island escape ship set sail from Mallorca in Spain. Lonica Contes and Mickey Kanasaki had been looking to rekindle their love. Lonnie was a successful attorney and the pair had got married back in 1995 after initially meeting at work. But unfortunately, Lonnie did not stay faithful and Mickey was heartbroken, and gradually the marriage just deteriorated. There was absolutely no trust between them anymore, and And Lonnie moved on pretty quickly and remarried a younger woman. Now, this was actually Lonnie's third marriage. It's honestly wild how much this man chops and changes his mind, because he then broke up with wife number 3 to get back with wife number 2, who was Mickey. So obviously he's cheated on Mickey, he got divorced, he remarried another woman, but now he's back with Mickey and he's trying to make amends, and he books them a cruise ship. And Mickey couldn't have been more excited to rekindle the relationship, but sadly she wouldn't survive the trip. The first few days on board were absolutely fine. The couple seemed to enjoy themselves and be having a good time. On May, the ship docked in Sicily and the pair explored the area. And I've been to Sicily, it's absolutely gorgeous. They then got back on board. The following day, Lonnie reported missing around 6 a.m. Now, Lonnie claimed that the pair had been in the room together that night before Mickey said she was popping to the canteen, and Lonnie said he'd taken a sleeping tablet and just gone to sleep, but when he woke up, Mickey was nowhere to be seen. He told the cruise ship staff that he'd searched absolutely everywhere and there was just
about you, and it's no one else like you is what they're getting. Positive vibes only.
And try and search.
Shout out to King Saul's boss in the building about you, and it's no one.
Flew straight back to the US. Guess whose house he went straight to? Yep, wife number 3. The police started looking into the couple in more detail to see if they could unpick what had really gone on here. They didn't really have much to go off. Interestingly, there had been 1 or 2 occasions where police had been called to the couple's home to deal with DV incidents. The couple had also mysteriously drawn up a will just before the cruise. Now, this will said that if either of them had passed away, the other person would inherit everything. Very odd timing. Then, very shortly after her disappearance, like a mere matter of hours, about 36 hours, I believe, there was a tragic discovery. Another boat came upon something floating in the water, and this was Mickey's body. Now, luckily, due to just how quick Mickey's body had surfaced, investigators were able to do an autopsy on her and found she'd been strangled before being thrown in the water. Suddenly, Lonnie was a suspect. Obviously, he was kind of the only person that police really could think would have a motive here. Why had he suddenly decided to go on this cruise just after writing a will? He'd actually never been on holiday outside of the US before, but there was no real concrete evidence that he was involved in Mickey's murder. So frustratingly, he was just allowed to go free and move to Florida, and guess what? He got another wife, wife number 4. But thankfully, things ultimately would come crashing down for Lonnie. Finally, Lonnie's wife number 3 admitted to having lied for Lonnie. She said that he'd actually told her previously of his plans to kill Mickey for a financial motive, and he'd threatened her to stay quiet. He was convicted ultimately of first-degree murder and was given life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Spooky story time. A follower named Astrid sent me this story, and we're going to call it It Follows. Astrid says that she is now 29, but when she was about 6 years old, she would always stay at her aunt's apartment with her aunt and her baby cousin that was a few months old. She says that at this apartment, the kitchen was right close to the entry door, and that her aunt started complaining that every time she'd be in the kitchen, she could hear the doorknob kind of like shuffling, like if someone was trying to get inside. She says that it would happen so often to the point where she was over it. She decided to put some dirt on the outside of the door to see if there would be some footsteps or something showing that there was someone standing out there trying to open that door. The doorknob starts to move. She runs outside. No one is out there. She looks down and the dirt is not even touched, not even a little bit. She ended up moving to a completely different apartment complex. And she says that this apartment was kind of like in a circle and there was a big tree in the middle. At this point, her aunt had already had another baby. And Astrid says that her aunt loved going out, she loved to go party, and she would get home very late around 2 or 3 a.m. Astrid's aunt soon started seeing this tall, dark figure staring at her from that tree. Then she started noticing that it would only happen when she would get home extremely late. One night, after a long night of partying, her and the father of her baby were sitting in his truck just talking, and it was about 2 a.m. And then he tells her, I don't mean to freak you out, but the whole time that we've been sitting in this truck talking, I have seen a dark figure staring at us from that tree. And that's when her aunt realized that it was not her imagination. She ended up moving to yet another apartment complex, and at this point, she had 3 children. Astrid says that when her youngest cousin was 5 years old, she started telling her teacher very weird things. Her 5-year-old cousin and the older sister shared a bedroom, and they had 2 separate beds. So her 5-year-old cousin would tell the teacher that there was a man and a little girl that lived under her bed. She even described how the little girl would climb out from under the bed. She said that the little girl would play with her toys, but she said that she didn't have a mouth. So when she would get upset, her face would just stretch. Astrid and her cousins would constantly stay at their grandmother's house, and Astrid's grandma also started noticing weird things going on with Astrid's little cousins. So now it went to following them to 3 apartments and now also to grandma's. And this happened for so long. Astrid's aunt would still see things, would still hear things, toilet seats being slammed, there'd be tapping on the windows, noises coming from the kitchen. Like, it was always something. What was really crazy is that by this point, Astrid's cousin was old enough and she was living with the roommate, and she was even experiencing stuff at that house. So time has obviously passed. Astrid's aunt and her boyfriend bought a new house, and Astrid's 3 cousins decided to go move in with her as well. And they are experiencing paranormal activity again. She says that her aunt has been hearing like a woman crying in her oldest daughter's bedroom. And her aunt even saw the same tall black figure standing at the foot of her bed. Astrid says that nobody knows what is going on, why any of this is attached to them, what it is, or what it wants. What do you guys think? Thank you so much to Astrid for sharing this spooky story. If you guys have any other spooky stories that you'd like to share, please send them via DM or email, and I'd love to read them, and I will see you guys in the next spooky story. Bye! Spooky story time. A follower named Claudia sent me this story, and we're going to call it Vivid Nightmares. Claudia is from Slovakia, and she says that when she was about 10 years old, one of her very dear friends passed away in a car accident along with his dad and his uncle. She, of course, attended his burial, his services, and everything. She was left devastated because they were very close friends. Claudia says that very same night, she saw like a dark figure standing outside her window. But because 1, she was too young to understand, and 2, she doesn't really believe in the paranormal, she kind of just brushed it off. She ends up falling asleep, and that night she has a dream. In her dream, she sees the friend that had passed away standing in front of her house. Claudia is emotional. She's crying. She runs to him, tries talking to him, and says, what happened? Like, are you okay? And Claudia says that he didn't have like this warm look on his face. His vibes were not welcoming at all, and his face looked kind of grim, kind of evil, and like upset. Because of his demeanor, she was so scared and tried to wake herself up from this dream, and she couldn't. Claudia says that he then began yelling at her and cursing at her and saying that this was all her fault. But again, very aggressively, like just so mad at her. She then wakes up in a full-on sweat, like freaking out, crying. She sits up, and at the foot of her bed, she sees a full-bodied apparition. And she says that this looked like a person, like huge, tall, like a person standing at the foot of her bed. She grabs her phone, turns on the flash, and there's nothing there. Claudia also says that when she was about 13 years old, her grandfather passed away. And she had literally the same dream that she had had with her friend, only her grandfather was standing inside her house, yelling at her, screaming, same thing, everything is your fault. Since then, she says that she always sees shadows or weird things like on the corner of her eye, just like walking back and forth, and she'll look and nothing's there, but she can just feel that there's something definitely there. She told her mom, and her mom sprayed their whole house with holy water. She did say that it stopped for a little bit, but it ended up starting over again. Claudia wants to know what you guys think about this. She doesn't know what's happening, why she had these dreams, and why they were blaming her. We will be reading the comments, so go ahead and comment below what you think.
Who else, man?
Honestly, the way that she
Sauce the
described
boss,
seeing her
man. Of
friend
course,
like yelling
Sauce.
at her and stuff like that was
Who else,
like,
man?
About you, and it's no one else like you is what they're getting. Positive vibes only. Shout out to King Sauce Balls in the build about you, and it's no one else like.
See you guys in the next spooky story. Bye.
Let's talk about the ghosts you see in your dreams. If you're new here, hi. I usually talk about some pretty scary stuff, and recently I opened an email where all of my followers and anyone who finds this page would be able to submit their ghost stories. And let me tell you, not only have I been getting an absolute abundance of stories that I have loved reading, they are also from all over the world, which has been incredibly interesting. Just like this story that I'm about to tell you. Let's get into it. This story comes from Marina, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, who immediately discloses that her and her family are extremely religious. And in their religion, they believe heavily in dreams. Specifically, that ghosts can communicate through dreams. However, within dreams, you're not allowed to communicate with these ghosts because it opens a door to the spiritual realm that you don't really want to mess with. And for what I'm piecing together, it's kind of like a Ouija board where you're communicating with something that you don't know. And additionally, they are the kinds of people that if they see something, no, they didn't. A little backstory about Marina and her family's house. It was built on a very old cemetery and is very old itself. And she does disclose that they hear and see things, but they never acknowledge it because they don't want it to get worse. And this all started 2 years ago when Marina and her friend were having a sleepover. And Marina says that this sleepover was going perfectly normal. It was like any other sleepover you would have with your girlfriends until nightfall when they both, Marina and her friend, were like, we got to shower. So Marina showers first, then her friend. And it's important to note that there is no light in the bathroom. And I'm only assuming because there's a window that lets in natural light, but obviously it's dark out, so no light. So they're using their phone flashlights. They propped it up on the sink, whatever. It illuminated the whole bathroom. After Marina's friend was done showering, she called for Marina to get her pajamas out of her bag. Marina gets her pajamas, goes to open the door to give her friend her pajamas, and she is staring at Marina with no color in her face. Marina asks, what is going on? What's wrong? Are you okay? The friend says, there was an old woman looking at me through that window. They were obviously scared, but they brushed it off because the only people home were Marina's mom and her bedridden father. A couple hours later, they're heading downstairs to make something to drink before they go to bed. And again, this friend was like, did you see that? Marina obviously didn't see it and was like, what are you talking about? This is the second time this happened. What's going on? Her friend says, you didn't see that tall man at the door? Marina says then she grabbed her friend's hand and started praying to kind of ease her mind. Fast forward a week later.
Held captive.
Marina gets home from dance, is very tired, showers, gets into bed, starts to fall asleep. She notes that she wakes up a lot throughout the night because of her anxiety. Same. But she distinctly remembers having a brief dream where she heard a little girl's voice say, it's right next to your bed. Marina obviously wakes up and lo and behold, what does she see? A full body apparition standing over her bed. And Marina says she does wear glasses, but she could see that this was a man. So she obviously jumps up, screaming, opens her brother's door, which was right next door, threw the door open and was like, we have to go to our parents' room. They go to their parents' room. They're praying with their father, trying to ease Marina's mind because obviously she's very shaken up. And for the rest of the night, Marina slept in her brother's room. And while they're laying awake before they're trying to go back to sleep, Marina's brother admits to her, I saw something walk out of your room and towards her parents' room. And Marina really feels as though this little girl that she heard in her dream has been protecting her from this other entity. And Marina says that since this experience, she has been having these dreams where an entity fully says, it's me. She says she prays a lot more and she hasn't had a bad dream in a couple months. And I just have a couple notes because y'all keep really scaring me with these stories. Number one, lady looking through the window when it is pitch black in the bathroom. Ew, I'm going home. Two, if my friend came over to my house and was like, I see dead people, essentially. You're going home. Anyways, that's gonna do it for me. Stay tuned for more ghost stories.
This is literally the vacation of horror.
It's his birthday. Everybody wish him happy birthday.
Oh, this is big right here, y'all. Everybody wish Sauce, the official boss, happy birthday, man. Let's go. Let's see it in the timeline.
We're back once again.
I like to.
You know, it's a beautiful day.
I like to.
If you feeling down,
wish
just get you a bag of that. And just light up. King Fire, Mr. Hero. King Freedom with 2, only the 3rd eye. Killer Vision, PSER, Red Hospital. Left me on the track. Accidents to opera. Conscience, unconscious. Flow riding on my train. Denzel, Chris Pine, unstoppable. Albert Einstein. Imagination is more important than knowledge. Therefore, I'm flying off the track. Extraterrestrial blunt, I got it on my lap. When I land Soul Train line, hop up on my dad. They fear what they don't understand. I forgive them cause they don't really know no better. Hope let them walk on water. I'm dancing in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean with a polo sweater. How bad do you want success? I was holding my breath unconsciously. The conscious me woke up and came up for air. I